Did you know that one of Spain's most famous football clubs has a genuine connection to Celtic? I'm talking about Real Betis, and the story begins more than a century ago with a young Spaniard called Manuel Ramos Asensio. Ramos Asensio was born in Andalusia and, as a youngster, was sent to Scotland to study at St Joseph's College in Dumfries. And this is where the Celtic connection begins. The school had been founded by Andrew Kerins, better known as Brother Walfrid. Yes, the very same Brother Walfrid who would go on to found Celtic Football Club in Glasgow in 1887. While Ramos Asensio was studying in Scotland, he developed a passion for football and became a supporter of Celtic. He would travel to Glasgow to watch Celtic play and became familiar with the club and its famous green and white colours. Eventually, Ramos Asensio returned to Seville. In 1907, he was one of the people involved in the creation of Sevilla Balompié, one of the clubs that would eventually form the modern Real Betis. And at this point, there was an important difference between Betis and the club we know today. Sevilla Balompié originally played in blue shirts with white shorts, but that was about to change. Around 1910, Ramos Asensio arranged for Celtic shirts and green and white material to be brought from Scotland to Seville, and Sevilla Balompié began playing in green and white. But there was an interesting difference. Celtic had originally worn green and white in vertical stripes, before switching to the famous horizontal hoops in 1903. So when the colours arrived in Seville, Sevilla Balompié adopted them as green and white vertical stripes. Those colours would eventually become one of the defining symbols of Real Betis. In 1914, Sevilla Balompié merged with Betis Football Club, creating the club that would become Real Betis Balompié. However, the green and white colours weren't immediately worn permanently. The club went through several kit changes in the following years. During the First World War, difficulties obtaining material from Britain even contributed to the club temporarily moving away from the green and white kit. But by 1919, the green and white colours had returned, and they have remained at the heart of Real Betis ever since. So when you look at Real Betis today, those famous green and white stripes aren't simply a random choice of colours. There is a direct historical connection to Scotland. A young Spanish student went to Dumfries. He discovered Celtic. He fell in love with the club's colours. He returned to Seville. And he helped bring those colours to the club that would eventually become Real Betis. And there's one more incredible part to the story. The man who founded the school where Ramos Asensio studied was Brother Walfrid, the founder of Celtic. So you've got a chain stretching from Brother Walfrid to a school in Dumfries, to a young Celtic supporter, to Sevilla Balompié, and eventually to Real Betis. That's why calling Real Betis a club with a Celtic connection isn't just football folklore. The connection is recognised by both clubs. In 2017, Real Betis even wore a special green and white hooped kit inspired by Celtic, specifically acknowledging the historical link between the two clubs. And Celtic themselves have acknowledged the story, describing Ramos Asensio as the founder who helped bring their colours to Betis. So, did a Celtic fan literally create Real Betis? Not quite. But did a Celtic supporting founder of Sevilla Balompié help bring Celtic's famous green and white to the club that eventually became Real Betis? Absolutely. And that's one of the most fascinating connections in football history. A story that begins in Scotland and ends with green and white becoming the colours of one of Spain's most famous clubs.